Okay, so I'm at my 5th garter stitch repeat. I've done 5 rows of garter and 4 rows of stockinette to give me a decently long cowl, and now I'm going to bind off. So to bind off, I've put a larger needle on my other needle. I'm using a size 11 just to give me a looser bind off. If you don't have a bigger needle, you can just bind off a little bit more loosely than you would regularly knit. So we're going to do this bind off knitwise, as we would be knitting the row. If you were to do a purl bind off, you would do it purl-wise. It's basically the same thing, only your yarn is in front. So we're going to move the yarn to the back of our work. We're going to put our needle in and knit 1 stitch. You should have 1 stitch on your right hand needle and all the rest of the stitches on your left hand needle. I'm going to knit the next stitch, and now I have 2 stitches. Taking my left hand needle, I'm going to move it into the front of the first stitch that I made on my right hand needle, and I'm going to pop that over the second stitch. So again, I'm going to knit off of my left hand needle, giving me 2 stitches onto my right hand needle. I'm going to take that first stitch and I'm going to pop it over my right hand stitch. You should always have one stitch on your working needle, and that is your bound off edge. You want to continue doing this until you get to the end, and I will show you what to do then to finish it off. Now that I'm on my final stitch, I have bound off my entire cowl, as you can see. I'm going to just cut the length of my yarn about, I don't know, 5 inches or so, just enough to weave in, and I'm going to pull it through. Just like that. Once you've got that final stitch, and you've officially bound off your entire cowl. So now we're going to seam up our cowl so that we can actually wear it this winter. You want to take your cowl and take your leftover yarn that you have, and you want to just kind of stretch your cowl out as much as it will stretch, and cut off a little bit more yarn than the length of the cowl. You can leave it attached to the ball, but I don't like doing that. Okay, so I've threaded my needle with my scrap of yarn that I cut off. I find that the easiest way to make sure that your work is perfectly lined up is to not start at the beginning of your work, but to pick a part of the work where you've either had a texture change or a color change. It's going to help you line up your work a lot better. So basically, we've done an extra row of knitting as our kind of selvage edge to sew with. So we want to start at this purl bump and pull our yarn through. I'm going to go over to the next row, and you can see that there's that extra yarn edge. So I want to pick up all of the little laddery, purly bumps that are between my stitches, which would be technically this garter bump from this row. So then I'm going to go up to the next little bump, which obviously I don't have any garter stitch rows anymore, so it's going to be this little bump between the knit stitch. It's your purl bump from the row behind. And I'm going to pull my yarn through. I'm going to go to the same side, going up 1 bump from the first one that I picked up, and I'm going to pull my yarn through. You want to pull your yarn loosely, not too tight. We can tighten it up in a bit. So again, going over, there's that last purl bump I picked up from this side. I'm going to pick up the purl bump right above it. And I'm going to keep doing that, just picking up right above the purl bump that I just did until I get to the next garter stitch section. Okay, so now I've finished up that one row and I've pulled my yarn tight. You'll see that your yarn kind of slides around if you hold the work, and it lets you pull it tight so it looks like a seamless stitch, but on the back you have a little bit of a seam. So it's not the same. So what I want to do is I want to pick up the bumps that were in line with the bumps that I was picking up before that were between my knit stitches. But now they're on the surface, they're pretty easy to see. So I'm just going to pick up that one and pick up this one that was in line with my knit bumps. Obviously, because it's garter stitch, there are knit stitches in here. They're not all purl stitches. So right above that purl bump is another knit stitch that has that purl bump behind it that you want to pick up. The little ladders behind the knit stitches. And then you've got an obvious purl bump and an obvious purl bump. And then right above that, if you stick your needle in, you've got the little hidden ladder. And that is how you want to seam up your garter stitch. Just continue going between those obvious purl bumps. And the little hidden ladders. If they're not that evident, just kind of stick your needle where you think the bump will be, and you'll find the little ladder bit. You'll find that little ladder bit, and then you just want to pull through. It's not exact, it's just kind of... And if you pull it tight, just hold your finger over it, pull it tight, give it a little tug, and you have garter stitch kind of in the round. It won't perfectly match up. If you want to try and line them up perfectly, you can. I'm not too bothered by it, so I just kind of pick up where I can. Okay, so say you're seaming up and your work has gotten a little bit away from you, as mine has. Right here, you can see that this row of garter stitch is a bit lower than this row of garter stitch. So what you want to do is, because I'm about 1 or 2 rows shy on this side, I'm just, instead of picking up this next purl bump, which I would normally do, I'm just going to skip it, and I'm going to pick up that one. And then I'm going to pick up that purl bump right below the garter stitch row, and I'm just going to skip one more here, and I'm going to pick up that purl bump. And that should line me up. As long as you don't skip massive amounts of rows, as long as you're just picking up 1 or 2 along the way, it won't really make that big of a difference, but it will even your work out. Okay, so I've fully seamed up my cowl. Looks like this. You can kind of see the seam in the garter stitch rows, and I will tell you why that is. It's because the garter stitch bumps need to be knit technically on the ends if you're going to be seaming up garter stitch. So if I was going to seam this up like I would seam up garter stitch, I'd pick up just the bumps that are on the ends. And see, that's a much cleaner look, but then these sections would splay out more than these sections and whatnot. If you want to do it that way, you can, but instead of picking up in line, you pick up the bumps on each end so that your garter stitch rows look like they have gone continuously, if that makes sense. But really, just pick up the bumps on the end, and then you've got your garter stitch all done. And now your cowl's all seamed up. So now you finished up your cowl, it's all knit, it's all seamed up. Now you want to weave in your ends. So I'm just pulling one of my ends through to kind of close it up. And to weave in garter stitch, you want to duplicate this loop right here. So I am going to just pull that through. There, and I'm just going to kind of push it over there. And I'm just going to go through and duplicate the garter stitches. I'm just following the pattern with my needle so that if you turn it over, it's harder to tell. Now when I'm done, I'm just going to go back through there, up one more, and I'm just going to go back through there and lock it in. Then when I trim off my edge, you'll barely even know it's there, and that's how you want to weave in all of your ends. Okay, so now we finished up our cowl, and hopefully you can wear it and it's beautiful, and you're probably thinking, Megan, this cowl's a little bit scratchy. What do I do? Well, you want to wash it, but you don't want to wash it in the washing machine. You want to take either a tub or fill your sink up with cool water and use either a yarn soak or a hand washing detergent like Zero and just soak it for 5 to 10 minutes or however long you want. It'll get all the stuff that they put in the wool out. It'll make it feel lovely, and every time you wash it, it'll break down a little bit more and get really soft, and it will allow the yarn to bloom, which is where your stitches open up. Once that has soaked long enough, you want to rinse it out in cool water, and then take a clean towel, put it on the towel, fold it in half, roll it up, squeeze out the excess water. You can either lay it flat on a drying rack, or you can literally block it, which is where you take a towel or a blocking board and you pin it so that it's the exact shape that you want. I don't do that because I'm lazy, and a lot of the time my stuff doesn't really need to be heavily blocked. But you can do that if you want, if you feel like it's not the shape that you want. So since we hopefully wound our hank of Cascade Eco Wool into 2 even balls, you should have another half left, which is perfect for our next project where we're going to knit a toque. That will teach you how to knit in the round. So we'll use some of our skills today that you learned, and we will apply them to the next tutorial where we will knit a basic, nice, bulky weight toque in the round. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, I hope it was helpful, and that you learned a lot, and that you have a nice cozy cowl to wear, and I will see you later. So happy knitting!